Uh, it's a great honor to be here. My name's Yoon. I have the C in between Yoon and the Lee because when I joined Samsung 7 years ago, there's so many Yoon Lees. I had to distinguish myself between 10 other Yoon Lees. So that C is kind of an artifact afterwards. It's a pleasure to be here. I've never seen so many of my faces plastered. Okay, so I have roughly 90 minutes to spend with you. What I'm going to talk about today is a very simple message, yet I see not being practiced very well. And today's topic being Meet the Unmet. This topic was in my mind for quite some time, particularly when I joined Samsung 7 years ago. I saw a lot of the differences between East and West, and not just East and West in general, that we only see what we know. The world is larger than what we know. And I'm very pleased to introduce this topic for the first time through this event. And the title is called Yin Yang and Insights to Concept. So some thoughts. This is a photo that I took when I had a nice vacation in Maui just this summer. So as I'm coming to Thailand, when I was imaging, what would Thailand be like, this was my thought of Thailand. I have yet to see any ocean, but I'm sure you guys have, and it's a fact, pretty oceans like this. So why yin and yang in design? So let me just roll back to the basics and talk about what's so special about yin yang in design. Okay? When you think about things in general, things that are happening in general, objects that we create, service that we create, organizations that we create, anything that we encounter, there's functional purposes that an object, service, organization serve. Also, there are emotional needs, wants, things that come to us in a very emotional way. If you think about functional things, engineering comes to my mind very clearly. So when you are an engineer, I started my career as a design engineer. When you're designing or engineering something, first and foremost, it's about function. It has to perform. When you think about emotional things, art comes to my mind very clearly. If you buy a big piece of artwork for your office, if you buy a nice photography for your home, why do you do that? Does it serve any functional purpose? Very little. It just feels good. If you buy a pretty dress over any dress, why do you do that? Because it feels good, it looks good on you. There's really no functional reason. Design stands right in the middle of functional and emotional values. So by definition, design is a marriage between functional needs and wants and emotional needs and wants. So let me give you a quick example, and I think this example will give you a good overview of what I'm trying to say. So let's say that you went out and bought a bouquet of flowers. You want to bring it home and you want to put it in you want to present to your friends, family. If you think purely from a functional standpoint, this is all you need. And this is actually what I created at home. You just get a PET bottle, chop off the top, stick your flower in. Functionally, it's perfect, right? Never breaks, very cheap, and it holds water. Do you want that in your home permanently? Unless you're a starving student, even a starving student probably wouldn't want to do this. At least they would probably want to chop the top off very cleanly, right? This one's jagged. If you want to be completely emotional, this is one beautiful vase that I found in the internet. It will not hold maybe a couple drops of water, but that's about it. It serves really no functional purpose. It's 100% emotional. A well-designed vase would probably look something like this. I think this is baccarat. It's one of my favorite designs. It looks like one of those wrappers that you would wrap when you buy flowers. But if you think about this product, if you drop it, it'll break. So theoretically, it's worse than this functionally, right? But would you like to have this over this? Probably not. Maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but even a cheaper one, you would want to have something like this. So what I mean by design, it's not just purely functional. It's not purely emotional. It has to be balanced. There is a term called design management that started being used, I think in the mid-90s to early 2000s. Design management, by definition, means putting value to your functional putting meanings to functional, emotional values. So when you think about design, naturally, it is balancing yin and the yang, functional needs and the emotional needs. So a well-designed product or service is a result of great balancing act between the functional and the emotional needs and wants. So when I say yin yang on insight, why do I bring insight into this paradigm of yin yang? Before I begin this, let me give you a framework that's very well known. This was developed by a researcher called Kolb in the 70s. It is a foundation of design management. It's a foundation of design thinking. It's a foundation of everything in my mind, even science. So I'm going to try to walk you through step by step what this means to help you carry out the rest of the presentation and have you better understanding throughout today. So if you look at things in general, right, when you tend to either analyze or synthesize. On another axis, what you see, facts, are usually a very concrete piece of evidence. Opposite to that is having a very abstract thinking. So when you have a very analytical mind, and when you see concrete piece of facts, that's what you say, that's what's called your observing stuff, observation. It's context, it's what you see. When you see stuff, you don't bring in your abstraction. It's evident, it's concrete, and it's very analytic. When you start looking at things, then what you do is you start developing your own thoughts, your own point of view. That is insight. That's framework. When you say insight, the word insight is so misused in so many places. You know, you see lots of cows. My insight is if you go to a place, say there are lots of cows. That's not an insight because it doesn't bring you any abstraction. It doesn't bring any of your own point of view. It has to have your point of view to qualify as insight. So when you have insight, when you have that thinking, then what you start having is you start developing ideas. The ideas at the idea level is very abstract. There's nothing concrete about it. And you're starting to synthesize and formulate what you saw and what you think, oh, I wish the world would have this. That is the reason why people say there are no bad ideas, because it's still not concrete yet. It's an abstraction, but you're beginning to synthesize. Finally, when you want to develop solution, you can't have a very abstract solution. You have to bring it down to a very concrete level. And it has to be synthesized as final products or solutions. So going from observation to framework to imperatives to solutions, that's one full cycle of how you would see, think, come up with ideas, and bring concepts. This model was developed, it's a human psychology. It's developed by a researcher called Kolb. And this has been foundation of many researchers, scientists even, and designers alike. So when you look at this, one question that you would ask your mind to yourselves is that we are naturally biased to our own context. Everyone, not a single exception, everyone is biased. You're biased because of your upbringings. You're biased because of your own culture. You're biased because of your own society. So if you look at this framework, from the start, you're biased. The facts are there, but the way you see things from the beginning is biased. So when you have an observation, let's say one person is thinking from more like an yin way. The other one is looking things from a yang way. You're looking at the same thing, but at the end, you're going to come up with completely different concepts. That's why biased design works for biased users. Now, when I say biased design, I never said bad design, just biased design. So sometimes design makes sense if it's biased because it addressed to very niche people, very niche crowd or very niche segment, someone that follows you, your taste. Those are all biased design. There's nothing wrong with this. What I'm trying to address in this session is how do you discover the unmet? Because in order for you to discover unmet, you have to come out of your own bias. And if you are designing public program, if you're designing products for general use, if you're designing organization, it's very dangerous to have a very biased point of view. So building balanced concepts starts from building balanced insight. The reason is because facts are not biased. It's your point of view that's biased. So from the inside, it's very important for you to counterbalance your biased point of view. So yin and yang in insight is not about seeing right or wrong. Every action has reaction. And every face you see has the backside. It has the backside of the moon. So don't interpretate my yin-yang positioning as right or wrong or X or plus or minus. So let me give you some examples what I mean by balancing what you see. So these are some of the short lists that I have here. You know, from a very easy example, and this is not exhaustive, it's just a few examples, right? Plus has minuses, right? Black and white, I mean, that's very obvious. Spring has fall. Winter, summer has winter. Concave has convex. If you reach from in to out, there's always something that reaches from out to in. If it's individual, there's something that's more communal. If it's simple, then there's complex. If it's analog, there's digital. If it's monotoned, there's something that are more colorful. If you're a provider, then there is always a receiver. The list goes on and on. In my mind, every action has reaction, every observation has its counter-observation. So when you say user-centric, and this is a very important definition, many people in the creative community think user-centric means just thinking about the user. And I would like to augment that by saying user-centric really means you and your context plus user and their context. Because you have to know you and your context in order to design something that works for the user. It's not just about user only. It's you and your context plus user and their context. So let me give you 7 examples of yin and yang observation to insight. Now these observations, I'm in the process of moving from the US to Korea. I managed global PIT for 7 years at Samsung. Starting this year, I'll be managing more specifically home appliances within Samsung. So I've been traveling a lot. I've been moving back and forth between US and Korea. All these examples are something that I saw in the past 3 to 4 months. And I think it's going to give you a very interesting point of view. So depending on what time allows, I'll try to cover those 7 examples. From a very easy one, observation 1 is about address. Let me cover the address first, because I've been writing a lot of address to US and to Korea. I had to register for alien registration card in Korea. They're asking me for my US address, my Korean address, things like that. In Korea, the address is outside in. You define the province, within Korea, the province where you live, and within the province, the city you live, within the city, the district that you belong to, and the location and within location, who resides in that location. So it's very outside in. In the US, like this is a very easy example. It's all about me. I live in this location, which belongs to that street, which happens to be in this town, city, that belongs to California. So it's inside out. Now, what's so special about this? When you see something like this, you have to, I mean, this is just data, this is observation. But the inside is something that, it's my own point of view. So you may disagree with this insight, but this is what I see when I started writing my address. So in Korea, everything is absolute. So if you die, no one cares. I mean, it's a little exaggerated, statement, but it's an absolute coordinate system. Here's the province, here's the city, here's the district, here's the location, and that's where you live. In the US, I find it more relative coordinate system. I don't care where or what or California. I am going to move here, and then I'm establishing where I am in relation to where that city is. So that's my insight. That's my point of view. The way I experience in Korea, it's more passenger-like. I belong to the larger context of the city as a passenger. In the US, I felt more like a driver. I am driving to where I'm going, and that's how my addresses follow me. In Korea, it's more concave. In the US, it was more convex. So you can see, just by this observation, these were some of the imperatives, like insights, that I have, that I developed, which would be useful designing, for example, like address systems. If there's lots of foreigners from West living in a certain district, maybe this type of insight would have some kind of meaningful service to them. Let me go to a next example. It's about scale measurement system. When I moved to Korea, I've noticed that everything was not only metric, but it was like a 10-point accumulation system. So when you say, how long is this? We say in Korea, and I think probably in Thailand too, right? It's 10.2 centimeters, right? In the US, we say it's inch and quarter, right? And when we say inch and quarter, it's kind of an odd way of thinking. First, you have a full length value, which is 1. Then you divide that into half. Then you divide that into half, which is quarter. You divide quarter into half, which becomes an eighth. Then you divide eighths into another half, which becomes 16ths. So the thinking is backwards. The insight is, the way I felt like when I was in Korea was like glass was always empty, and I was just accumulating it. And in the US, glass was full, and I was just taking out from that. It was more accumulation. In the East, it was more contribution. I'm going to donate half of mine. I'm going to donate a quarter of mine. Whereas in Korea, I was just accumulating. I felt more forward. I felt more reversed way in the other system. Another observation. This is a typical dinner plate. Had any of you had like Korean food in the past? I don't know. Has ever had Korean food? This is what you see if you have Korean food. It's a massive amount of plates in front of you. And it's all for you. It's kind of a communal thing, but it's not like, this is for someone else. You got to circulate this around. Everybody digs into this massive amount of plates. In Western cultures, it's more like, you have your own plate and things are all prepared in that one plate. What does that mean? I see on the left more communal. I see on the right more individual. That's more like easy point of view. But what I see here is, it seems like in Korea, if you want to design something, you just can't go with just a simple solution. It has to be relatively complex. Maybe that's one of the reasons why products that are coming out of Korea is slightly more complex, or rather more complex than what's coming out of US. What works in Korea for example, is you have to have both complexity and simplicity. You cannot have just simplicity alone. Whereas it might work in the US by just having simplicity, giving no choices. Korea means it has to be covered. In the US, it's more focused. So for example, if you're a service provider, when I'm reporting to Korean executive, what I would do is I would give them a very, very simple executive brief, but I would also have a pile of evidences right next to me from this insight. So these are very small observations that you would see from an everyday evidence, but it has a very rich meaning when you translate that into concepts, business, and services. Another interesting one that I've observed now since I've started driving in Korea is the traffic law. In Korea, it isn't illegal to make U-turns unless it has a designated U-turn sign. So you can only make U-turns at intersections where it has the U-turn sign. In the US, generally you can make U-turns wherever you want to. Intersections where you can't make U-turns, there's a no U-turn sign. I mean, there's small variances in laws, like commercial areas, you can't make U-turns. Residential areas, you can, things like that. But in general, it's legal to make U-turns unless it's posted otherwise, right? So what does that mean? I find more like you're guilty unless proven innocent type of approach in the East, whereas in the West, it's more like you're innocent until proven guilty. It's a completely different mindset. It's a more permission-based society, whereas it's more exception-based society in the US. This one, in my mind, it looks more top-down because you allow you to do something rather than, you can do U-turns wherever you want to. And the US, I feel it's more like a bottoms-up society. So just a simple traffic sign is what I'm observing here, but these are some of the insights that I see. And depending on what you see, if you're only within your own context, you would never see how it's working on the other side. Another interesting observation, this is really wild, I think. Left is a Korean stock exchange board, right is the New York Stock Exchange board. What's really interesting that I noticed is that in Korea, if your stock starts performing good, if the stock price starts going up, it actually turns red. Isn't that wild? Whereas in the US, if it starts going down, it turns red. I mean, same human being, how different, I mean, this is like wildly different, right? What I see here is in Korea, they're asking you to buy, right? In America, they're asking you to sell. They want more attention because, look at this stock, it's going up, it's going up. In America, I see this more as a warning. It's a more result-driven system here, I think. Whereas New York Stock Exchange, it's more potential-based because there's lots of stocks that are potentially good, right? So stock ticker, red and green are completely reversed. Another observation. This is my restroom, my bathroom. The one on the left is my home in Seoul. The one on the right is my home in the US. What's really interesting is my Korean home, the light switch is outside the bathroom. My home in the Bay Area, the light switch is inside the bathroom. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen a bathroom in the US where light switch is outside. In Korea, it's more common to have light switches outside of a room that you're entering. What do I see from here, right? I see a culture of more being served in Korea. Like, I want to prepare the room before I enter. In the US, I see a culture of more do-it-yourself. You go in, and it's up to you whether you want to turn the light or not. I don't care, you know? It's a more result-driven, like I want the result first before I enter the room. Whereas this one is more like process-driven on the right. You go in, okay,
go through the process turning on the light, if you care. Right? In my mind, the left talks more about the space. I want to prepare the space first, whereas on the right, it's about the user. I gave user the option, so it's up to the user. So I'm not going to prepare the space for you. You go do it. So it's a small thing, but over the course of like just 2 months, I'm seeing all these interesting facts. The last one is the most challenging to see, but this is what I'm seeing from business reports. And I'm not sure if this file is being circulated to you or not, but I have to apologize ahead of time. The one that you see on the left is actually an excerpt from my company. And it's not meant to be read. I just wanted to kind of give you an illustration. Please don't take photos of this slide. So when I was in the US, a typical MRD, do you know what MRD is? Market Requirements Document, right? At the last stage of marketing activities, if you want to launch a product, you write a document known as MRD. In the US, I'm very used to writing a very extensive, very descriptive, very long reading MRD documents. In Korea, everything is short. There's lots and lots of tables, and it's very brief. What do I see? I see more content-driven culture in Korea, whereas more context-driven culture in the US. I see more as a do kind of mentality, go do it kind of mentality, whereas more think kind of mentality in US. I see more fast, now you have an MRD, go do it, more fast, whereas a bit slower contextually a bit slower from what I see in the US. So even just the business documents alone, I see these massive amount of differences. So let me give you 3 examples of meaningful designs from insights based on what you just see. The first example is this product called Icebreaker. This is one of my favorite candies. I love this candy. Has anyone had this candy before? This is a great candy. I love it. If you look closely, there is this weird writing that you probably, I don't know if you've gotten or not, but on top it says to share, and on the bottom it says not to share. Interesting, right? So they're just kind of playing with the, they're playing with their emotions. When you open the candy, obviously one section is bigger, the other section is smaller. Now, how many of you think the bigger section is to share or not to share? Let me see your hands. Okay, actually most of you, right? And the smaller opening is for not to share, right? Okay. It's actually the other way around. See that? To share has a smaller opening, and not to share has a bigger opening. Why is that? Any Americans here? Why is that? Because in the US, we don't like people digging into my food. If I want to share, I'll just, give me your hand, I'll just shake it on top of your palm. I don't want you to dig into my food. Right? It's more personal culture. Many of you thought to share with the bigger opening. Here, mostly, I didn't say all, but mostly in Asia, it's a sharing culture. It's a communal culture. So naturally, when you say to share, it has to have a bigger opening. It just doesn't make any sense, right? What are you going to do with that little small opening, right? So, this is a great candy. Has a great little feature like this, right? It's very emotional. It's very fun, actually. But in my mind, if I want to sell this, I think they sell this here in Thailand. I saw this in Korea as well, too. If you want to sell this candy here appropriately, all you need to do, really, all you need to do, I'm sorry, I forgot this slide, but it's a design. The designer for this candy is probably from West. If you put this into context here, the user is East. personal versus communal, me and you. I think I covered all that. So if I'm shipping this to Thailand, all I need to do is this. All I need, just take the label off, rotate the bottom, put the label back on, right? That makes much more sense. So it's a very simple idea for improving your product. And I only have simple examples here. The reason for that is because it's very difficult to explain about how we go about designing this and that handphone or home appliances, devices, or TVs. But I'm picking out very simple examples to give you what I mean by insights to concept and yin and yang, and then all the connection between those two. All right. Let me go to next example. It's about service design. Again, the service design example is very, very simple. And service design has become very important. And designing service is very, it's not an easy task. It's very complex. And particularly, you have to think about who's using the service. I mean, everything, like even the products, everything, you have to think about who's using this. But for service, particularly, I think it's very relevant. This is a hotel that I used to stay when I was in Korea. I think I stayed this hotel, I don't know, maybe a little over 100 days last year. Like 1/3 of my life was spent in this hotel. One of the all the elevators, right? For security purposes, you need card to access, particularly the floors that your guests stay. You can't just press and go into those floors. I mean, some hotels allow you to do that, but this particular hotel, it was all renovated. Before it wasn't like this. It was all renovated. I think the renovation ended last August or something like that. They completely closed the hotel. They reopened it. It's all renovated. Beautiful hotel. They wanted to go through extra security measure, and they put the security that you need to basically, flash your card and then press the button. Okay? And this is how it is, as is.
Sorry, the floor selected is a restricted floor.
It says, when I press it, it says, sorry, the floor is a restricted floor. So when I first visited the hotel, I had no idea what that meant. I mean, I just had no idea. What does that supposed to mean? Sorry, the floor is a restricted floor. So are they having some sort of secret government operation on all these floors? I mean, I pressed all the, like, what is going on? I pressed all these buttons, and with the exception of the top floor and I think the bottom 3 floors, which is the lobby and business center and meeting rooms, it all said the same thing. I had no idea what that meant. Then I realized, oh, security, right? They want you to use your card if you want to go to the guest floor, right? So if you think about who the designer was for this service, who the receiver was, I'm damn sure it was a Korean designer who designed that. I mean, they used probably an English voiceover, but it's a very restricting culture who designed that. It's prohibited, right? I'm not going to allow you to enter that space unless I give you the permission. That was the mentality that went on. The early example of you're guilty unless you're proven innocent kind of mentality, and it's a very permission-oriented mentality. This hotel, the majority of the clientele at this hotel, they are business travelers, and they're from usually all over the, they're from all over the world, usually from the U.S. or Europe, from Western countries. So the majority of receivers are Westerners from West. They have a mentality of I'm innocent until I'm proven guilty. It's not like, oh, like what did I do wrong kind of thing. Sometimes do you have that feeling? Sometimes you feel like you did something wrong even though you didn't do anything wrong. And then it's more of an exception-based culture, right? So I think the service was, it's a good design, but it didn't really consider who's using that service. So it had your point of view and your biased way of designing it. They wanted to put the security measure in, so they put these messages commenting that you can't go into that floor unless you have this card. But I think it was addressed inappropriately. So this, I would probably change it like this.
Please swipe your card to access this floor.
So instead of the floor you selected is prohibited, to please swipe your card to access this floor. I think that's a much better way of addressing who the receivers, the receiving end is for this service, right? So particularly if you're interested in designing, this is again, very small segment of example, but if you're designing service, you have to think about these things, you have to think about who's your context versus the receiving context. Okay, last example, example C. This is an organization design. The organization design is really the pinnacle of the design. Organization design is very, very important and very, very difficult. So I try to give you a very simple example on how to design organization right. And this is actually what's happening within my organization in Korea. Okay? Although it doesn't really have all of those connotations, but this is a real-life example. So when you launch products, you go from concept to launch, and then one important thing is end of life, right? End of life is as important as launching and building. So in order to go from concepts to end of life, these are all the usual functional areas that that you need to have in order to launch a product. You have to have a strategy on what you want to build. You have to plan on strategically how to source and when and what and all that kind of stuff. Then you start designing. When you have the design done, you go through engineering. When the engineering is done, then you test. Then you send it out to the manufacturing. Then you market. You go through sales, customer support, and then it actually goes back to strategy because you have to figure out when to end your product or service, right? The very typical cycle. And this is exactly how it's structured at Samsung and HP and Apple, Microsoft, everywhere. The best way to do this right is actually you doing everything by yourself. The reason is because you are the one who came up with the strategy. You are the one who planned. You are the one who designed and engineered. So you maintain all those contexts why I want to do it this way. So the best way to do this is doing it all by yourself. But if you start managing tens of thousands of SKUs, if you have multiple portfolio of products, and when your organization starts to become, 100,000, million to billions of dollars, it's difficult to manage it, by one single person, right? So what they do, you start having these departments, right? So there's a strategy department, there's planning department, there's design department, there's engineering department, there's testing department, there's manufacturing department, there's marketing department, sales, customer support, things like that. Now, what do you see? What are the differences between those two lines? The dotted lines and the departments that I created. Any big differences that you see immediately? The line is what? Continuous. The blocks are discontinuous. The line is an analog process. The blocks are digital process. So what happens when you start creating these departments, and I'm sure if you ever had a small experience of working for a large company, they start fighting against each other. Strategy starts demanding against planning that you're planning differently from what our strategy is. Design and engineering always fights. Engineering hates testing because they test some of the ridiculous things that they think is not worth testing. Manufacturing hates usually design a lot because it's not manufacturable. right? Marketing is lost because they don't know what the value proposition is. I think I skipped this document, but you know, it has to all center around customer value proposition. That's the core. But in many cases, marketing's lost because in order to create marketing communication, they have to understand the core value proposition, but they don't understand what that value proposition. And then sales think marketing is just wasting their money. And then end of life, right? So that's a very typical mistake that large companies, it's not a mistake, it's just by virtue of having a large company, this is what typically happens. You know, they started constructing all these different departments, and they have these departmental frictions. And large organization, this is extremely difficult to overcome from one department to another department. There are lots of meetings, like sometimes all day long, to basically close the gap between the departments. That gap right there. So what do? You want to minimize those gaps, right? And this is what's actually happening in real world. It's happening within my company. It happened in all the former companies that I used to work for. So strategy and planning and design, oh, you know what? Design paradigm has changed. So it's not just industrial design, there's also user experience design. Oh, wow, we need that. Engineering is not just hardware, we need software. Oh, not just software, service engineering as well too, right? Oh, if that's the case, then we need service planning. Right, software planning too, hardware planning too, right? Strategy, they're all different. So what they started doing is instead of trying to reconcile, what they do is they create even more departments. So design becomes hardware design, software design, service design. Engineering becomes hardware engineering, software engineering, service engineering. Is there something wrong with this slide? Is it getting anywhere near analog? It's still digital, right? So what you really want to do is you want to go from analog to digital. You don't want to create more gaps, right? I mean, that small gap that you see is still gap. And what you're seeing that is if you sum that up, right, it's actually creating more friction points. Because now what's happening is that within the design department, you're starting to have friction. Within the engineering department, you're starting to have friction. So this is not the solution. This is not the solution for designing an organization. So what would you do? How do you transform a digital-like created design, organization into more analog-like organization? The answer is you have to rotate people around. Okay? So what that means is that if you happen to be the person who came up with the strategy, you move to the planning department. And as part of the planning group, if you have a very successful planning done, you move to the design department, and so on. Even the designers, they have to move to the engineering department. There's multiple ways to do this. One way to do is creating a task force team where everybody belongs to one product line. Or there is a Toyota model where there's chief engineer. There's multiple ways of doing this. And there are organizations that successfully did this. But the essence is that you don't want your people to be stuck in your organization permanently. Because what that happens is that the world, the view that you have, becomes very introverted, and it resides within your department only, and only within your department, that you never think about outside of your department, where the work is never digital. What you do, your life it's not a digital life. What you do at work, your life is all analog. Remember that. What we created are functional silos. They're digital. So your mission is to close that gap, not by dissecting that into finer digital chambers, but figuring out a way to circulate between those two departments, between multiple departments. One of the complaints that I get from when I do interviews for organizational design or how to improve my own organization, a very typical complaint that I get from planning people is that I never get to see what I plan at the end. And it seems like the salespeople get all the credit of my good idea, right? The typical complaint that I get from designers is that these guys who are engineering, they completely screwed my design. That's a very typical complaint that I get. Engineering department, a very typical complaint that I get is like the designers don't understand what engineering does, right? And those complaints are usually a byproduct of having a very digital silos, digital chambers of organization. So hopefully I've given you high level of how to find unmet needs or unmet the other side of the moon. I wouldn't say the dark side of the moon, it's just the other side of the moon. It could be a good side of the moon, but it's a different side of the moon. This is a photo that I took at Lake Tahoe when I was skiing. It was one beautiful clear day, and the amount of snow that just came down was just so amazing. I was on a ski lift and I took this photo. So if you remember my opening photo, if there's a summer, there's always a winter. I know Thailand, it doesn't snow here, so I urge you to visit countries where it snows to get that balanced point of view. It's wonderful. Best performance is obtained in balanced state. And let me exaggerate that a little bit. Let's look at our human bodies. We have two hands to secure things solidly. We have two eyes to have great perspective. With just one eye, it's very difficult to develop perspectives. We have two ears to balance correctly. We have two legs to have firm support. Why aren't we using both sides of the brain? Creativity doesn't mean just right side of the brain, it's actually both sides of the brain. It's not left or right, it's left and right. It's yin and yang. So unbiased design delivers the maximum business performance and the maximum value to users. Unmet needs are usually seen outside of your own bias. Remember this, it's very important. You can only see what you're surrounded and within your context. In order to find the unmet needs, it simply resides outside of your own bias. So good concept design must counterbalance your bias point of view by deliberately looking at your opposite side. And this word deliberately is very, very important. You have to make an effort because if you don't, you can't see it. It has to be a very deliberate effort to counterbalance your point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoon, for the insightful presentation. It brings back memories. It seems like what you're talking about is very polar-oriented, left and right. And, you know, is it possible to look at it from a bandwidth perspective, you know, that you can slide back and forth? And how could that affect design, or how could that affect your philosophy of thinking?
Unlike what I said here, I actually like polarization. I have my own taste. Yep. Taste is never in the middle. It's always in either left or right. So my essence here is more for like public sector design or common products, something that are more middle, mass-oriented is what I'm talking about here. There are two different. I forget what the framework of the psychology is. You know those like in psychology scale, there's type A, type B. You know, like very aggressive people. You know, to like amiable and all that, right? There's that framework, but there's another framework called how much can you adapt to a certain situation. You know, I'm a type A type of person, but I need to adapt to the opposite. I think A, B, C. That's C, right? In a given situation, and that adaptability also is actually more important. So when you say in terms of sliding, I think it's actually more important to be able to slide between those left and right to find out who your audience is and to balance it correctly, rather than just to find like, this is the middle, so this is, I'm happy with this.
And do you actually, how do you implement your philosophy in your department that you work in? Does it affect the product that you create?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are a Korean company and we sell products globally. There are two different types of products. One is a globally platformed product and the second one is regionally platformed product. Globally platformed products are something like cell phones and TVs. They're mostly led by technology. So those are things that consumers never saw before, and we're trying to create new behaviors and new experiences. Whereas regionally based products are something like home appliances. So sitting in Korea and trying to understand, for example, America or Europe or even Thailand is very difficult. So what we typically do is we utilize PITs around the world to bring in that local insights to balance what we make in Suwon. So we don't totally rely on, you know, only rely on what just PIT says all the time, because there are more behind the scene issues like manufacturing, engineering, all of that. But it's a very, very important input for us to design products right for that regional market.
So do you have design offices around the world that actually gives you input?
We collaborate with, Samsung has multiple design offices. So we have PITs around 5 different countries: US, India, China, and UK, Europe, and Singapore. We also have multiple design offices. And we also have what is known as lifestyle research laboratories around the world. So we all collaborate to provide that rich insight of a particular region.
So do you collaborate with other companies in terms of research and engineering?
We embrace open innovation model very, very rigorously. We don't collaborate very frequently with our competitors, although we do at times. But we do embrace outside talents, outside thinking, you know, just outside creativity into our own products. And that's also very similar to the paradigm that I was thinking. You know, just having an inside, you know, we can't have the outside countermeasure. So then we reach out to the outside creativity to counterbalance what we have inside.
One of the questions was that someone has a problem with their engineering team and the design team, and they're quite interested in your rotating philosophy and rotating style of work culture, but he can't picture his engineer working in the design department and vice versa. What sort of advice?
Yeah, that's why it's challenging. It's not easy, but you have to do it. So let me give you a real life example of how that happens. So from design to engineering, if you come up with a very innovative design, then when you go to the engineering department, the natural friction is like that's not manufactured, or that not manufactured, but that's not, from an engineering standpoint, that doesn't work. But how to close those two gaps is, as a designer, you have to explain your intention of designing it that way. And I'll give you a very good example. This is from our dual view camera example. Any of you know what dual view camera is? It's the camera with an LCD in the front. The camera market is almost dead. So it's a very rapidly dying segment, but believe it or not, 4 years ago it was very big. So when we came up with that concept, the concept is really, the value proposition is you want to see yourself while taking your picture. Because back then it was like 2008, 9, 10 that time, when we did our research, 76 or 72% of all the photos that were posted in social media site, this was the early days of Facebook and all that. MySpace was still in operation back then. 76% of all the photos were photos of yourself. But there weren't any cameras supporting that, so we came up with a very simple, that was a good insight. We came up with a very simple concept. The value proposition was, I want to take the photo of myself, and I want to look while I'm taking the photo. That was the value proposition. When it went to the engineering department, there were lots of issues. First of all, small LCD is not sourceable because no one uses small LCD anymore. It has bill of material costs. So their solution back to us was, I want to put an IR sensor or some sort of sensor. When it detects your face, there is a technique for facial detection. It'll beep, and you know it's good enough, and then you can take a photo, and then you can turn around and see yourself whether it's a good picture or not. So I mean, it's a very, very functional approach. You see the functional and the emotional, right? So it's not that you're only functional or only emotional, but they're not understanding the context. They're not understanding the value proposition. So all you need to do is you just need a designer in an engineering department to advocate the value proposition, right? And then when the engineer starts understanding that value proposition, they change. They say, I get it. That's why you need an LCD. So that's the kind of thing what we're trying to do. Vice versa works the same. When you design, if you want to design efficiently, right? I mean, you can always push the design, and then you can always challenge the engineering. But when you want to design efficiently, if you understand what those engineering constraints are, you could actually be very creative without spending too much money. So everything has value. Every commercial product has value. You can't expect to charge thousands of dollars when it has only 10 cents value, right? You have to design for the value, and value means dollar. So having that mentality or having that mindset for designers, by having engineer, more open-minded engineer into the design department, and having them explain about how the engineering process works helps immensely to close those two gaps.
And further on to what you just said, I was just wondering as well, like when you mentioned the word value proposition and putting the designer in the engineering department, should that value proposition be from a user's insight rather than the bias of the designer? Because I feel that that's always a problem, because I've worked in this style before, and the engineers always say, no, you guys are crazy because you are the designer. So my question is, that value proposition, where should the input come from?
It depends on the size of your organization, really. I don't want to get into a complex discussion of this because, there's a second layer of complexity of bias versus unbiased. As designers, you're naturally biased, and you create biased designs, and people buy into your taste, right? And I'm exactly the same. But the essence of this message is if the organization is big, then you want more objective data or objective measure to put everybody on the same page. And usually those are the best if you have something that's measurable. So like user's perspective or quantifiable consumer data, those are very good mechanics to have in the middle to have consensus between different organizations. Now, I don't know if I should say this or not, but there's also a trick we use in generating data. And it's again, I don't want to confuse people. I gave this lecture, and then I don't want to confuse people, but I don't know. I mean, I think you're all design-oriented, and I think you will understand what I'm about to say. If you don't experience certain things, it's very, very difficult to test. You cannot test experience. You can only test experience by using it. But if you want to use it, you have to make it. But you won't make it unless you have the data, right? So there's this conflict of chicken or the egg kind of thing. So as designers, or not designers, I use term designer, but I'm using designer more as somebody who's responsible for creating something. You have to fully have your belief in the insights that you developed. If you don't have that belief in you, it's very risky to launch anything. If you have a full belief on the insight that you generated, then there's always ways to prove that quantifiably. I hope you know what that means. But you could always put numbers behind what you want to say. It's a different technique, but there's a way to do that. So the first and foremost thing, the most important thing is that having the full belief of your insight.
Can you share how Samsung become a design-led company?
That, let me cover some of the more well-known activities that Samsung did in the past. Samsung, this is a well-known fact. Samsung actually in the 90s had office inside IDEO. This was when Samsung wanted to become more leaders in design. And obviously, we didn't know what we were doing in terms of process. We had lots of good people, but we didn't know what the process was. And when you say like, why is process important? You know, creativity and process seems to be like kind of opposite end. Yes and no. Yes, it is opposite end from a theoretical standpoint. But if you have, again, billions of dollars to manage and thousands of portfolios to manage, unfortunately, you have to manage towards some sort of a common denominator. And in order to have that common denominator, you have to have minimum process. So that's how we started becoming more design-focused. That was back in the 90s, I think 97, 98, 99. We had offices in IDEO. And then now we have a big design operation, both in Seoul as well as outside. And our chairman is very driven and very, very focused on having design as one of our core value propositions for Samsung.
I think this will be the last question. Samsung has made thousands of products, and some are successful, some are not. Can you share some examples of what you've learned from the success and the failures of some of these products?
The most important learning is that failure is never a failure, really. This is easier said than actually practiced. And within Samsung, this is still very challenging. And you know, I want to say this in a more colorful way because it's so near to my heart. You can't really learn unless you goof up, right? I mean, if you don't goof up, you don't know what the improvements are. And the failures that we make, many failures that Samsung makes internally and externally, we consider that as like a learning opportunity. And apologies that the statement is really bland, but you know, if you think about it, that is so true. That is so true. Success really doesn't give you a whole lot of learning. There's really no learnings after a success. I don't want to mention a specific product, but I've also experienced that success actually led to a bigger failure at the end because people are so joyful about the success, they don't think about what's going to happen in the future. Whereas a mild failure is actually very catalytic to a greater success for the next generation.
So it's like almost like an iterative process that you keep learning.
Absolutely, it's all you know, it's all learning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.